We're extremely honored to be joined by Aswath Damodaran. In his own words, before anything else, he is a teacher. Aswath is the Kerschner Family Chair in Finance Education, Professor of Finance at NYU Stern, where he teaches corporate finance and valuation. Prior to NYU, he also taught a few classes at UC Berkeley. He has written extensively on valuation, corporate finance, and investment management, and is the author of several widely used texts in finance that have shaped how both students and practitioners think about valuation and markets. His work is recognized not only for its rigor, but also clarity and intellectual honesty. It's an honor to be joined by you today, Professor. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm going to get straight into it. So, before you were sort of teaching or writing about valuation finance, how did you sort of find yourself in this world? I'm aware you grew up in India. How did you sort of enter finance? Were there any mentors, any ideas, or what sort of pushed you into this
Not
field?
really. I mean, I wanted to teach, and I enjoyed finance in my classes, both at IIM Bangalore and at UCLA.
Right.
The choice of finance came about because I enjoyed the topic. I enjoyed the mix of even then data and stories that drives finance.
Mhm.
So to me, teaching was my choice, and that was accidental. It happened because I was a TA in a class at UCLA, and I remember walking out of that class saying, "This is what I want to do with the rest of my life." So I was lucky in the sense that that realization came to me so early in my life, whereas people often have to struggle to get there.
And were there any mentors you had early on in that part of your career? I'm aware you
I
kind of.
don't like, I'll be quite honest, I don't like the word mentor. I
Okay.
mean, it goes back, I think, to this notion that somehow there is this wise person above you who can guide you. You learn from everybody around you. And I think it's not a single person, it's a combination of things I've seen in other people I I admire, and I said, look, I want to try to do that. So it wasn't any single person somewhere along the way who guided me and said, this is what you should do. Because I think people spend their entire lives looking for that guru. I mean, it goes back to, I think there's somebody in a cave up there who has this infinite wisdom.
Mhm.
And if you can just get there and you spend your entire life trying to get to the cave when in fact it's all around you. You know, learn from everybody around you. Don't make it about a single person. You know, unless what you mean by mentor is somebody who kind of eases the path and gets you through, you know, gets you through by throwing their weight in your favor. I'm sure there are people who've thrown their weight in my favor in several decisions that were made along my lifetime, but none, but they did it on their own. It wasn't because I sought them out or they sought me out. It just happened.
Okay, very interesting. I like that way of thinking. I think to assume that one person has the answers can be quite foolish at times as well, and to have,
People are people, right? I mean, people have, you get a mixed bag, and you know that with people in your own families, they come with their strengths and their weaknesses. You get the package, that's why I've always been leery of people who worship other people, right? Investors like Warren Buffett. There are lots of things about Warren Buffett to admire, but remember, he is a human being. He has his own blind spots. And recognizing the blind spots is not somehow, disloyal to him or being, I think it reflects the reality that you get the package.
right. You've spoken about how you grew up in a joint family setting. So I think you mentioned how within 5 miles you had 100 family members. Was there any dissonance in that environment, or even a positive, I guess, factor for growth that sort
The
of allowed you?
pluses and minuses, right? I mean, it's the plus, of course, is that you're born into a team. You have cousins and dozen cousins. You don't need to go out. It also, in a sense, also insulates you because you don't have to go out. You don't have to go out and seek. You know, so I think that as with mentors, it's a system that comes with pluses and minuses. And I grew up at a very different time in India. The India today is not the India that I grew up in.
Mhm.
It's a country where, I grew up, in fact, in a part of India where TV hadn't arrived yet when I was growing up. In South India, it hadn't arrived yet. So you had to create your own things to keep you occupied. I read a lot, I played a lot, but I had no media to watch. I remember I had an old transistor radio on which you could listen to BBC and cricket matches. And to me, that was the only thing I ever used media for.
Mhm.
It was a different time. And again, and I don't know, it's not nostalgia. Every person is a product of their upbringing and their times. And I'm a product of mine.
You moved to the US in 1979. Can I
Mhm.
ask what sort of prompted that move? Was there a certain perception you have or you had back in that time that the US is this, the US is that, that you sort of wanted to explore or perceive?
I think at that time, you just want to escape. I mean, India is for me at least, was a very constricting setting. People's lives were laid out in stone, who you would marry, where you would live, what you would do. And part of it was, much as I love my family and love the setting, I wanted to make choices, and the US gave me those choices, being away. And really the only two choices then were the UK and the US. You didn't have Australia or Canada's choices on the table. It was US or UK. If I'd been born 10 years earlier or 15 years earlier, I probably would have thought about the UK, but by the time you got to the late 70s, the US was actually the only choice if you wanted to keep studying and get an advanced degree.
Right. I'm gonna jump in the timeline a little bit. So I'm gonna look at Wall Street as a concept. You've largely remained formally outside of Wall Street. Um, Looking back, how has that distance sort of shaped the questions you ask um, in a public domain, but both to yourself? And how do you feel you've sort of been, I guess, enabled to say things that you've come up with, like viewpoints?
Well, I mean, I think first, Wall Street is not a concept. It's a geographical reality. It's a street in New York with the exchange on it, right? So, if by Wall Street you mean markets and trading,
Yeah.
clearly you can't be in New York without having that effect.
Hmm.
And of course, there's an ecosystem around it of people who are involved with that trading. And so I think the more general question is, there's a financial services business that Wall Street has become a stand-in for. And many of my students go to work in that business. So I'm aware of how that business has evolved. And over time, I've also taught in many of the investment banks. I taught the JP Morgan training program for incoming analysts for almost 32 years. So I saw from JP Morgan change from a small bank to acquiring Chase to becoming the largest bank in the US by far. So I think and when I, and the financial services business itself grew while I grew. Now I started in my journey in 1981. 1981, Wall Street was a side player.
Hmm.
Main Street drove what happened in the economy.
Hmm.
And in the last 40 years, clearly Wall Street has moved to the forefront. Markets drive what companies do rather than companies driving what markets do. And along the way, it also has drawn the best and the brightest. And I have mixed feelings about that, which is by giving compensation packages that's so much larger than what other jobs are offering. Wall Street drew the best engineers, the best doctors, the best mathematicians into its orbit.
Hmm.
And, the plus is for those people, they earned a much better living than they would have in their normal course of. But it also means that society is losing its best and its brightest to a business that doesn't create value. For the most part, much of Wall Street doesn't create value. It just takes existing value. And I'm not saying it doesn't provide a service, but somebody has to make real things for Wall Street to exist, right? It exists of other things. And I have a feeling that we drew the oxygen and the brilliance out of a lot of other businesses in the process of building up Wall Street. So maybe over the next, and it's grown too big. Too many people work in finance for the value added in the process, which is a terrible thing to say because you're turning out MBAs, they go out for a finance job. And I think the reality is the business is too big I mean, my guess is it's got to shrink by at least 50%, which is a lot of jobs that are going to be lost over the next 3 or 4 decades. But I think AI is just going to be an excuse for doing it. But it was, with or without AI, that shrinkage was coming because, like everything else, sometimes you overreach, and finance and Wall Street overreach. No. Over those 40 years, though, I've never consulted a day. One of the reasons I'm able to say the things I do about Wall Street and the practices that bankers often adopt or consultants do is while I teach the people who go into these businesses, I've remained a teacher. I don't consult. I don't sit on boards of directors. I don't have any formal role or formal connections with companies. And, and I'm okay, and I'm not just okay with it. I'm glad in hindsight I made that choice because it's given me the freedom to say what I do. And if people read me, I know it's not because I have some massive insights that other people don't have, but I can say things that other people either cannot say because of their connections or aren't willing to say because of blowback. No. Much of what I've said about ESG, a lot of people have felt, but they could not say it because it was viewed as untouchable, right? At least at its peak, when Wall Street had bought into it, Main Street had bought into it, everybody talked about it as a fait accompli. This is the Nathan. And I looked at it, and my reaction was the same one that Gertrude Stein had after visiting Oakland. There's no there.
Mhm.
This is the emptiest concept I've ever seen. I don't know how people build around something that is so amorphous. And I was able to say that because I didn't care what the blowback could be. And at this stage in my life, it is what it is. So I think the benefits of being above the fray and not being commercially involved is it's given me the freedom to say things that I otherwise could not have said.
That's great. I think having that freedom is, I think, something that you're, from what I can tell, very
I was
grateful for.
lucky. I mean, I was lucky, right? I mean, most people, so I don't pick on other people for not speaking up because I understand your livelihood depends on it. You have a family to feed. I was insanely lucky to be in a profession and at a setting where I could say what I wanted and essentially be able to live with the consequences and have it and make a decent income along the way as a teacher.
Mhm.
So I'm just lucky, and I don't view myself as somebody above the fray or nobler than other people. It is just what it is.
You mentioned ESG, so I want to touch on that a little bit because I've read some of your work on it. Sometimes, and I've seen this as well, companies are obsessed with sounding good rather than doing good. The way you've put it as well, I think that's a very good
Mhm.
way to synthesize that.
Always. That's not sometimes.
Yeah,
Always, right? Human beings in general want to sound good. I mean, think about. I mean, you might not have had an equivalent of family dinner, right?
right,
Everybody's asked to describe how things are going. You want to sound like things are going well, right? No. So I think that this is human nature. Companies want to sound good, but doing good requires sacrifice.
right,
And human beings don't like sacrifices. So this is, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that companies do it. It just surprises me that we built an entire architecture around that sounding good. And what what I find concerning is the ecosystem of people who make money off you sounding good, consultants, bankers, ESG's core measures, when in fact nothing is being accomplished, but a lot of words are being spilled along the way.
Mhm. Do you think there can be a balance between having honesty as a company, having practices in check to make sure that your governance, the impact you're having is still good while not falling within that, I guess, that trap of
Those
ESG?
are such diffuse words. What does that even mean, right? I mean, if you're dishonest, it's legal,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's really ESG is in that gray space where there are things you can do that can create value, but you're worried about social costs, externalities. We've known about this for centuries with private businesses, great externalities. Historically, what's the process by which we've dealt with externalities as a society? We know private business to treat externalities. What's the process we've used? I'm turning it back to you. What is the process we've used?
So if we've had a negative environmental externality, we might put a cap on carbon usage per company,
Who puts a cap?
governments, regulators.
It's not you don't put it yourself,
Yeah.
governments and regulators, right? So externalities, essentially, if you're in a democracy and you feel there are a lot of externalities private businesses create,
Mhm.
what do? We vote for the government that we think will deal with those externalities. They pass laws and regulations. And here's what ESG offered as promise that I think makes it so dangerous. They said, you know what? We can govern ourselves. Who's we? CEOs of companies, we'll put the caps on it.
Right.
It effectively, ESG was created because we lost faith in governments, regulators, laws. And somewhere in that period, at least in the middle of the last decade, we also put CEOs in pedestals, especially if they were in big tech companies. We worshiped them. I mean, that period has passed. We assumed they were smarter, they were better. And I think it's extraordinarily dangerous to allow companies to self decide what their line should be in the sand. In fact, here's what will happen if you let them self decide. There will be some companies who actually do the right things and do things they don't have to do, but they do it because it's good for society. But let's face it, to do that, you got to create extra costs for yourself. I don't buy into this. You can have your cake and eat it too, which is you can do good and have more revenues. You can do good and have lower costs. No, that's the lie. So my problem with ESG is not that they're trying to get companies to have this balance
Mhm.
between creating making profits and taking care of society. That's a balance that private businesses have followed, and over time companies have self-imposed constraints, I mean, well before ESG. But they did it recognizing that those self-imposed constraints you did for two reasons. One is because you knew if you walked too close to the line of the legal and the illegal, one crisis would put you over the edge, so you didn't do it. The other is you found a way to market what you were doing
Right.
and tried to say, hey, we do this, so we're a great company, buy our t-shirts, right? And that's always been true. The supreme lie at the heart of ESG was they sold people on the notion that you can be good and more valuable. You could be good and earn higher returns. That's the lie that's got them into the position they're in. So I think businesses, if you're a private business owner and you say, what should I do? You have a conscience, you know what's right or wrong. You don't need to take an ethics class to get there. Of course you run a business, but in the process it leaves you broken morally and you can't deal with those consequences. Of course you should draw a line. If you manage other people's money though, which is what you do as a manager of a public company, you have no business drawing the line on your own.
Mhm.
That moron who ran Unilever for a decade, who essentially, he went around telling divisions that they should come up with socially good reasons for their products. How the heck do you do that for mayonnaise? Yeah. But but the problem I have when managers draw this line with the help of consultants is it's other people's money.
Mm.
Effectively with ESG, we're taking decisions that used to be in the domain of investors and putting it in the hands of top managers and consultants. And that never ends well. So I think the ESG is pretty much in its dying throes. But I've seen this business. It's a business created by Harvard Business School professors. Usually, you know, it'll get a new name. I'll give you what the new name is going to be. It's going to be sustainability, another great sounding word, but I have absolutely no idea what you mean. But I'm sure in whatever school you're in, there's a sustainability course. Go in and be the skunk at the party. Ask questions, push back. You'll be viewed, of course, as the aim. I mean, as a moral troglodyte. That's how I describe myself when I wrote my first ESG piece. Is people are going to think I'm a moral troglodyte. But we need pushback if we want this process to actually deliver an end game that's good for us as a society, as people.
Mhm.
We can't let this basic dressing up of companies as good companies continue.
Right. If we take one step back and look at it from I guess, a broader sense of when I'm investing, when I'm giving a company or a sector my capital, I'm hoping that that capital is going to advance it, and that's going to lead to better performance, and then
No, no, no.
eventually.
You're doing it for let's start off. Why do you invest?
to make
You
a
earn a
return.
return. Why do you earn a return? Because you need a pension, you need to buy a house,
Right.
right? So let's start with that, right? And that's why I think the reason we need to start with it is this isn't money coming out of nowhere, where if you mess with it, it doesn't have, it has real consequences, right? People's pensions, people's savings are at play. So you want to earn a higher return. You invest in a company where you think you can earn a higher return. Okay, continue. So
If I want to sort of have a negative screen where I don't invest in certain sectors, defense,
absolutely. And what if you've taken an operations research class, you're taught optimization, right?
yeah, I've heard of it,
Can
mathematically.
a constrained optimal ever beat an unconstrained optimal?
Mhm.
It can't. So if you want to add a constraint, of course, it's your money. See, I don't want to buy tobacco companies. Absolutely. But don't do that and tell me that you're going to deliver a higher expected return on your portfolio, right? The essence of being good through history has always meant giving up something. Of course, it's your money, and you want to give up something because you don't want to invest in tobacco companies. Fine. That's your choice to make. But if you're managing a pension fund and you decide you're not going to invest in tobacco stocks because it makes you uncomfortable,
Mhm.
my advice is find another job where you can be comfortable and do your job. This is other people's money. If you want to go in front of those pensioners whose money you're managing, put it to them and they say, okay, we agree on this constraint, then all the more power to you. You have no business making moral choices based on your definition of morality, because you can't assume that everybody shares your definition of good and bad
Right.
without buy-in from the people whose money you're investing.
Can the same apply to me managing my own portfolio, you think?
It's your money, right? You can add as many constraints as you want.
Mhm.
And if those constraints essentially let you, I mean, I have a very simple test on personal portfolios. It's called the sleep test.
Right.
If you lie awake at night wondering what's in your portfolio and how it's doing, you fail the sleep test. If you buy a tobacco company and it's giving you all kinds of ulcers because the guilt you feel, then don't buy it,
Mhm.
right?
So you have to stomach that this is an amoral path. It's not immoral, it's not moral, it's amoral.
No,
Would you
it's
say that?
your moral path. It's your moral. It's not amoral or immoral. It's your moral path. It's your choice. It's your money, and you use your definition of morality to define the constraints. So I'm not saying don't ignore and it comes with this recognition that when you add constraints in, it's going to cost you.
Right.
You can minimize that cost by doing better things, but don't tell me you're putting in these constraints and earning a higher return.
Mhm.
And sometimes, you know, the constraints you put in can be hypocritical.
Mhm.
So you say, look, I'm not going to buy fossil fuel companies. But then you turn the heat in your house up to 74 because you like a warm house.
Mhm.
And you drive an expensive SUV and use immense amounts of power. Are you really
No.
doing what you thought you were going to do? I mean, in fact, there is this very famous paradox called the Jevons paradox, which is every time you get this advance that makes it seem like you're going to create good, it actually, the end product is bad. For instance, putting in recycling bins, right? That's a good thing. You put in recycling bins. Now we think about recycling. It turns out that people drink a lot more canned sodas now than they did before because they say, look, I'm going to recycle it anyway. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
You got to be careful about the consequences of throwing things in that make people feel that they're doing the right thing. But the end product is not delivering what you thought it would.
That's very interesting because it's so easy to sort of be on a moral high ground, your own moral high ground, and say, I'm not going to invest in that. But then can you actually look yourself in a mirror and say, am I actually changing my own consumption? Because that's where it starts, right? That's where it starts and that's where it also ends.
If I walked into your wardrobe and it's a big room with 50 shirts and 40 pairs of pants,
Right.
You are in effect creating a footprint on the planet that by other choices you make, so I think you got to be careful. And this is why I think if you make moral choices, don't put yourself on top of a pedestal and say, look, I'm being moral. Keep it between you and your portfolio.
Yeah.
You're being moral, you're making choices. That's great. You don't have to tell the entire world. You don't have to convince other people to do what you're doing. Just move on, right? I mean, in my experience, whenever I run into good people, they never spend time telling me how good they are.
Hmm.
Right? We ever heard, I mean, I was lucky enough to grow up and to listen to Mother Teresa in person.
Wow.
I don't think I've ever heard Mother Teresa, and I watched lots of recordings of her, ever tell the world how good she was. Good people don't usually tell the world how good they are and how much good they're doing. You know who spends a lot of time telling how good they are and how much good they're doing? People are among the most dangerous, the biggest scams of the world are usually pulled off by people who put themselves on a pedestal, tell you how good they are and how much good they got, which is part of the reason I get skeptical whenever I see a third of an annual report for a company tell the world how good the company is.
Mm.
Right?
Self-righteousness. So in your philosophy, self-righteousness can be a warning sign that we should perhaps
It
look.
is, it is a warning sign, right? Because I think self-righteousness and the tendency to lecture other people on their choices are both bad signs. And guess what? A lot of the space is full of people who do just that.
Mhm. I think it goes back to the concept of image management. If you have these beliefs, as you said before, you don't need to sound good. You're doing good. You continue doing good. Why share that? Why amplify that? It's a lot to think about, and I think this is a question that students definitely should think about as well.
Yeah. Which also tells you a lot of this is just marketing, right?
Right.
The doing good part is to get you to buy their products and services. It becomes hypocritical because it's not about changing the world. It's about getting your money. And I'd have much more respect for you if you're open about the fact of we do this because we have a niche market and that niche market cares a great deal about this idea. So we're going to put that idea up there and say we're supporters of that idea.
Mhm.
But be very careful. You open that door, you are going to have other ideas that come up where people are going to say, what do you think about that idea? It's part of the reason I think companies have to be leery about staying out of politics in general, of
Mhm.
taking positions on things that are not germane to their core business.
Right.
Doesn't mean they don't have views,
Mhm.
but a company is a legal entity that's designed to make money. It's a commercial entity.
Mhm.
And a company should not have views on every potential issue on the face of the earth because nothing good comes out of that.
Right. I want to focus a little bit on your philosophy of thinking. So you've sort of spoken many times about how you daydream. You think about companies, you sort of go in that process, and that's something that I think at this current stage of society we're in is something that's quite valuable, especially with AI and so many things. Having that time to think clearly without a external influence, I think that's very valuable personally. What sort of questions do you ask yourself when you daydream about companies or concepts or?
No, the way I like to think of my brain is it's like a cooktop with 10 burners, and there's something on each burner.
Hmm.
10, I mean, it might be things I've been thinking about that I put into that, and I just let it sit.
Hmm.
Because when you consciously say, look, that is what I'm going to focus on, there's a time to do that.
Right.
But you got to let things simmer. You got to let things kind of play out until they get ready. When will they be ready? When the pot gets hotter and it starts to get more filled with stuff. At some point, you look in the pot and say, "Hey, this is close to being done. I need to think about this more." So when you look at my blog posts, almost all of them started as a simmer 6 months ago, 5 months ago, and they simmered and they got to a point where other things went in there. And I said, look, this is getting close to where I can pull different things together and essentially write about it. So I don't consciously try to solve problems at a point in time because you're pushing things. So when you let things kind of play themselves out, and that's the advantage of having that space in your mind of letting things play out without forcing the conclusion. Sometimes the answer kind of comes out, and sometimes you take something on a pot that you put into simmer and say, nothing happened. No, that never. And you could be okay with that. For every 10 ideas that I kind of put in my mind and say, let me think about it, three or four I end up not doing much about it because there's nothing that came about it, nothing that followed through.
Do you think a lot of it involves connecting things that are frankly unconnected?
Yeah. And I think that's part of, it goes to, your personal life. I mean, the reason I'm able to do the things is to me, there are no clear boundaries between personal, my teaching, my writing. I mean, they all kind of flow together. I'm looking after my 6-month-old granddaughter right now, and a lot of time, a lot of empty space and time for me to think about. Because while I'm rocking her to sleep, I mean, it's not exactly that I'm typing on the computer at the same time. It's giving me time to think. And as I watch her learn how to crawl and learn new things, I'm thinking, well, maybe there's something here about how human beings learn,
Mhm.
and how that plays out in our investment choices that starts to get established in what we do when we're 6 months old. Will there be a post about it? Maybe. It's simmering there. It's one of those pots simmering, and it's something that that I will get around to, sooner or later.
Right. I want to touch on valuation a little bit. Are there any moments where you sort of have a valuation, you've sort of come to a, I guess, a mathematical way of looking at a company, but there's still something that doesn't sit right with you, your instinct, your gut. There might be a thought in your head that's sort of firing, and you sort of recognize that. How do you sort of deal with that? Because if the numbers are right, but your gut feeling,
Your sequencing is wrong. I never start with evaluation in mathematical terms. I think of valuation in story terms. Now, what is the story here? And the story has to this is like that pot that simmers. The story has to form and get fully formed before you think about the numbers and the math. And I think that's part of the problem in valuation. People want to start with the numbers, and then as an afterthought, if at all, they think about what's the story here. You got the sequence wrong because I think that by then it's often too late. The numbers have driven you off the track. So I almost start with the story, and until I get a clear sense of what the story is, I don't even try the numbers.
can there be a point where the story sort of doesn't comply with the numbers, or vice versa? When you
No,
say
I pick the numbers to comply with it. So the numbers don't come from somewhere else, right? They're my numbers.
right,
So if the numbers don't comply with the story, there's only one person to blame. It's me, right? I picked the numbers. So if I picked a high growth rate for a company where the story is a slow growing market, hey, that's entirely on me because the numbers are not thrust upon you. They're choices you make.
right. I also want to touch on being wrong. I think that is one part of investing that as someone who's young and is sort of exploring the concept of having my own portfolio, um, I've often heard a lot of portfolio managers or people in the industry say that you have to sort of burn your fingers a few times, know how it feels to lose money. What's your take on that? And if you've ever lost money or been wrong with an investment decision, how do you
Well,
sort of?
it's a question of, hey, you're always going to lose money on decisions.
Mhm,
Portfolios are about net effects, not getting each individual investment right. But losing money still teaches you nothing unless you're willing to look inward, right?
mhm,
You have to ask, why did I lose money? 90% of the time, it might be that you are in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's entirely luck, not much to learn there, but it might be something you did in making the investment choice that did you lose money. And I'll be quite honest with you, looking at it is never comfortable because it's often something that's a weakness in how you approach things, and nobody likes to look at their weaknesses. So when portfolio managers say that, I have to laugh because they never learn from their mistakes. They make lots of mistakes, but they never seem to learn,
mhm,
right? And to learn, you need a framework, something that you can go back to. It can't just be learning that's random. It's got to be learning that allows you to structure your thinking better for the next investment.
mhm.
So it's true, you will make mistakes. You can learn from your mistakes. But to learn from those mistakes, you have to dig deeper as to why you made that mistake and what it tells you about the way you make choices.
And when you make those mistakes, perhaps in a market environment where the market and narratives are sort of against you, How do you sort of stay true to your own values, your own beliefs, your own investment philosophies without being too rigid?
Oh, you don't. You sometimes break away, and then you got to be honest that you did that, right? It's easy to say I have a philosophy. I've stayed true to it 100% of the time. Nobody does. That's like saying I'm religious and I've never sinned. Come on, who can say that, right? Or, because you're always going to make you do things that were wrong, and then you got to say, I shouldn't have done that. I try as best as I can to stay true to what I think. But sometimes you're going to get caught up in the mood of the moment or in the peer pressure that you feel and do things you shouldn't have done. The one thing I've tried to do is when that happens, I try to be not just honest with myself about it, but to put it down on paper. My posts so often reflected when I've had that moment to say, I shouldn't have done that.
Hmm.
The best way to do it is to actually put it down. Because once you've made it's the equivalent of a confession. The reason confessions work is because not because you might get forgiveness after you confess or because you believe in it, but the process of letting other people know you messed up and how you messed up is often the first stage in not doing it again.
It's very interesting. I think I remember reading if not, it might have been on a podcast or I might have read it, but I think the word conviction for you is one that you don't like, because it's got
Yeah,
very
I mean, I don't like it because when you talk about conviction, at least the way it's used in the investment community, it's once you make a choice, you have to stick with it, no matter what. And no matter what is an extraordinarily dangerous add-on to put in investing. What does that mean, no matter what? What if the data starts coming in that tells you that your original choice was wrong?
Mhm.
No matter what is going to drive you to bankruptcy. So, conviction in a world with as much uncertainty as we have, and as much data as we have, and as much information that we're getting is, it's not a word that holds up, at least in investing.
Right. Yeah, I think you've said it explicitly numerous times that you can never say never. I mean, it
Yeah,
is you never know what might happen at the right price. You might buy something that has value.
absolutely. Yeah,
Uh,
might be, and it might change business, change management. Lots of things can change along the way.
mhm. Speaking of change, how has that mindset of yours evolved over your career? I would presume that this is something that has come to you after a lot of mistakes, a lot of reflection, a lot of writing. Was it always did you start out this way? What was your viewpoint when you might have, let's say, come to the US in 79?
I'm probably a lot more flexible in my thinking, a lot less rigid, a lot less willing to accept absolutes.
Hmm.
I see shades, more shades of gray, far more shades of gray than I did 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Hmm.
And to me, that's a good thing, right? I mean, two things can be true at the same time, even though they seem contradictory. And that's now we live in a world where people don't seem to want that. They want things to be black and white, absolutes. Are you on my side or against me? Value or growth, trading or investing? Yeah. I don't think it's that easy. And I do see more shades of gray than I did, and I think it's made for more nuance, more richness in my thinking.
Nice. That sort of brings me to time horizons. I think that's a huge part of investing that a lot of investors don't necessarily consider. And when I say time horizons, I think more from a philosophical point of view that at this particular age, I'm willing to sort of have this belief of a company because I'm maybe, let's say, 30 years old. So I'm okay with sort of experimenting. But if I'm perhaps say 80, 90, where I'm reaching, an age where my investments, the returns I'm getting from those investments might not really matter to me. How do you sort of think of age and time horizons and how that can evolve as well?
My problem with time horizons, investors think that they have control over it,
Hmm.
right? You gave the example of the 30-year-old, right? Let me enrich that example. Let's suppose you're a 30-year-old
Hmm.
in a job that you might lose next year with health conditions that might lead you to potentially get sick. What's your real time horizon?
It's
It's 6 months, 3 months. You might need the cash next month, right? Yeah. That 80-year-old might have accumulated insane amounts of wealth over their life. When they invest at 80, you know what? They don't care because they're going to pass on. The money's going to become part of an inheritance.
Mhm.
And if they have children and grandchildren, their time horizon might be there, based on their grandchild's age. So I think that time horizon is not based on one human being's chronological age. It's a function of lots of different things. And the truth is, much of your time horizon is driven by things that you don't control, your job, your health, you know, rather than things you do. And I think people need to be honest with themselves because we're, I think, almost hardwired to say, when I ask you what your time horizon is, we're almost hardwired to say, I have a long time horizon.
Mhm.
You know why, right? Because if you don't, we start attaching words to describe you. You're a speculator, you're a gambler.
Mm.
Long term sounds good, short term doesn't. And I think that's bad. I don't think that's leading us to become better investors. Because why go through the charade of acting like you're a long-term investor when you have cash needs or health conditions that really make your time horizon 6 months or a year? So I think that we need to be honest with ourselves about what our true time horizon is. Short term, just be upfront. Say, I really need to invest for the next 6 months, a year. You might think less of me because I said that, but it is what it is.
Right. And speaking of, I guess, uncertainty, because that's a theme that I think that sort of came out in your answer. Obviously, we can't predict what's going to happen 6 months from now. I think macro forecasts are something that you've spoken
You
out.
can't predict what will happen 6 hours from now, right?
Exactly.
6 months. I mean, we can't predict anything in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you see a lot of macro forecasts that sort of say interest rates will do this or exchange rates will do that. Or would you sort of, because I've sort of come across your work and I've seen that you're a bit wary of macro forecasts. Um, why exactly do you think? Because
Who's making these forecasts? People whose job it is to make forecasts. It's their job, right? Right. So I'm not going to pick on them for doing it, but the quality of these forecasts, that's a very different issue, right? I've never seen a macro forecaster add value in the long term. Why? Because especially in the 21st century, macro forecasts have become, in the 20th century in the US, macro forecasting essentially was easy because the US was like a well-oiled machine that repeated itself over and over and over again. I don't know how useful they were, but the forecasting actually worked because you were forecasting something where there was a mean reversion and things reverted back. 21st century, that's gone. I don't even know why we make macro forecasts anymore, other than recognizing there are people whose job it is to make macro forecasts and sound intelligent while they do it and give you a story about why they're doing it. I don't have issues with them doing it. I'm just not going to use their forecast.
right. Yeah, because I think it sort of goes back to, again, you said you can't predict 6 hours. You can't probably predict what's going to happen.
It's it's not that you can't predict. I mean, it's there are thousands of things that will affect the economic growth of an economy as big as the US or the EU over the next year, the next 5 years. Thousands of things.
Hmm.
And one of the books that remains one of my favorites, a book called Chaos. It's written by James Gleick, who's a New York Times reporter, I think. And Chaos is the story of chaos theory. And at the origin of the theory was this, I think, weather scientist called James Lawrence, I think that was his name. And he was working with this gigantic model designed to forecast the weather in some part of the world, hundreds and hundreds of inputs. And you had to enter the inputs, and the model spit out forecasts of the future. Very elaborate model. And this is physical sciences. So you could argue that physical science should be easier. And here's what he discovered is one of the inputs, it was 0.0005 was meant to be entered, but the person entering it entered an extra zero in.
Mm.
One small input somewhere, and the model went haywire. One small input driving the entire model up. And hence was born chaos theory. Chaos theory basically means there are things that look chaotic on the outside, but then you look inside, there are things have order. I mean, you go to Penn Station, you stand up above the station, you look down, it looks like chaos, right? People walking in different directions, but each person has a place to go, a track that they're trying to get to. So chaos theory basically often it tells you about, when you're doing forecasts, some small things somewhere can make your entire forecast go off. So I think that's part of the problem here is we're working with incredibly complex systems. And we can hold things constant in a lab or in an economic model and try to do forecasts. But you in the real world, you can't hold things constant. Things change on you.
Right.
And I think we live in a more chaotic world than we used to 30 years ago, 50 years ago. Part of it is globalization. There was a point in time where the only things that played in your model were local factors.
Mhm.
To focus the Indian economy, you need now to forecast the Indian economy, you need to forecast who will win the next election in the US. I mean, that's a fact you didn't have to consider. So I think that those are all things that make forecasting more difficult and feed into the mistakes you see.
With this increasing chaos, obviously we have so much more information. Do you think we have too much information?
I think we have too many podcasts, too many things written about the market, right? Everybody's an expert. We spend all our time. So I think that it's not that we have too much information, we have a lot of opinions,
Mm.
right? That's basically it. What you call information is 1,000 people spouting off about things that they barely know much about, but acting like experts on it. So we're drowning in noise,
Mm.
not in information, in noise. We're losing the signal because there's so much noise around it. I actually think people are less informed about investing, doing worse things in investing now than ever before, even as the amount of stuff out there that they can use to get more informed is increasing. That's a contradiction, but you can see why it's happening because there's insane amounts of noise in this process.
So how do you filter out that noise? How would you advise someone to filter out that noise?
Read less, listen to podcasts less, think more. Right? It's as simple as that. If you're spending all your time with your headphones in, listening to podcasts or reading every moment of every day or having it read to you, you're not giving yourself a chance to get away from the noise.
Mm.
You need to kind of turn off CNBC. I've never watched CNBC. In fact, the only times I watch CNBC are in that lead into my actually being on CNBC. The 5 minutes I wait, I think the less noise you let into the game. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be informed,
Right.
but I think that information takes a lot less time than you do. Be aware of what's happening around you, but don't get immersed in what other people think about what's happening around you.
Right. In a different vein, you recently announced the third edition revision of Investment Philosophies, something that I'm looking forward myself to reading when it comes out in early 2026. Could you sort of tell us a bit about that and sort of what prompted you to do the third edition?
Well, I mean, in general, new editions come about because the old edition you look at and say the things have happened that I want to bring into this book, right? If that doesn't happen, I've never felt the urge to put up a new edition because it's not as if writing books is a money maker for me. It takes up time, and I will do it only if I feel. So for me, the third edition came about because the second edition was in 2012. And if things happened since 2012 that weren't there, that investors have, yeah, they have choices. They have now, no, with starting with meme stocks and, how social media is driven in influencers. And of course, crypto. Is there lots of things that have shown up now on people's that I could not talk about in 2012 because they weren't there.
Mhm.
So part of what's driven this is the market has become a more chaotic, richer set of choices. And I want to talk about how that affects how you invest.
Mhm. Right. And is there anything specific, without giving too much away, obviously,
Mm.
is there anything specific within that book that when you were writing, you felt, when I was writing the second edition, maybe in 2011 or even 2012, or up to the build-up of the publishing of that, something that sort of has the biggest difference to you? What has been as a
The
theme?
biggest difference has been the fall of old time value investing because old time value investing was very simple and very lazy. You bought low PE, low price to book stocks. And much as we like to dress it up with the great value investors thinking about companies, you were beating the market effortlessly by doing lazy things.
Mhm.
And for much of the 20th century in the US, which is where the markets were centered, you know, doing that was enough to earn you a good return. And people patted themselves on the back and called themselves brilliant because they said, look, my returns look great.
Mhm.
In the last 15 years, almost every single one of those lazy variables has been turned on its head. In the last 15 years, high PE stocks have beat low PE stocks. High price to book stocks have done better than low price to book stocks. Non-dividend paying stocks do better than high dividend paying stocks. And it's raised an existential question about old time value investing, which is it time to move on? What's happened? So that became a recurring theme because as I updated the data to bring in the last 15 years, graphs that used to be slam dunks in favor of old time value investing have turned on them.
Right.
And of course, some of them might say it's a passing phase, but 15 years is a really long passing phase.
Especially when it's not just been a linear 15 years, but the chaos, as you've put it, has grown perhaps even, no,
Yeah.
perhaps exponentially. So yeah, I think that would be one part of the book that I hope stands out to me in my reading of it. If we touch on catastrophic risk a little bit, you sort of mentioned, I think recently I remember hearing you talk about the concept of catastrophic risk. I think you mentioned you got an email from someone valuing the Blue Lagoon in Iceland.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
just more so on the concept of how we model for catastrophic risk. It's we sort of touched on this earlier as well, but we sort of have this in my reading of, again, our understanding of what you said, we have this view that if tomorrow's everything doesn't, like, if that risk sort of happens, we actualize that risk, and the world is ending, or there's a belief happening that this is bad, that's good, whatever. Like, if that risk is actually met, is what I'm trying to convey. Um, I guess the thing is, nothing really matters anymore, so why really care about it? Do you think when we make models that account for risk, we're sort of accounting for the fact that nothing really matters, or actually accounting for that objective factor, or that probability that a risk might happen? Because if it doesn't matter, then why
No,
account for it?
I'll give you a very simple analogy. I'm sitting in my house in San Diego, which is 2 blocks from the Pacific Ocean. I can see the ocean out of my window.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting on one of the worst earthquake faults in the world, right? The big one is coming, and when the big one comes, and then I'm also thinking about how much I paid for this house, right? Now, if I were a rational person looking at all possible outcomes, there is a catastrophic event, in which case the house disappears into the earth or a tsunami wipes me out. No insurance is going to cover it because it's going to be too massive a catastrophe. Did I think about it when I bought the house? Not really.
Hmm.
Have I thought about it since? No. Because if I got up every morning and thought about the likelihood of an earthquake or a tsunami, I would never get out of bed, right?
Right.
Because essentially, and as human beings, I think we tend to do that. We think about catastrophic risk, we worry about it for a few seconds, and then we set it to the side because if it's central to our thinking, it'll drive us crazy. That person buying a Midtown Manhattan building, you're brilliant. Is he completely unaware of the fact that oceans might rise 3 feet and put that building? No, but he's saying if that happens and New York goes underwater, the value of my building is the least of my problems because I have much bigger So it's not that we set it aside. We just say the financial outcomes under that catastrophic event don't matter to me as a human being anymore because money will cease to matter. Survival, existence come into play.
Right.
And I think it's a healthy response or way of dealing with catastrophic risk because if we constantly thought about it, we'd never be able to function. In fact, going back to ESG and climate change, this has been one of my pet peeves. Is every year you have this circus called COP, whatever number it is, where people get together and warn us the end of the world is coming,
Mhm.
and they expect us to behave better because they told us the end of the world is coming. And my advice to them is stop being catastrophic. Because if you are catastrophic, I'm not behaving any better. I'm just trying to fit all the fun in I can in the next 20 years before the end of the world comes.
Mhm.
So I think in many ways there's a lesson here for people, policymakers and lawmakers, and people who want to change behavior, less catastrophe, more reasoned response. Talk about the things you can change. Because the more you make it catastrophic, the less likely it is that you get people behaving better.
Right. It's a very simple analogy for a topic that I've personally found very complex. I think it's a very difficult question, perhaps sometimes even nihilistic, asking yourself about what meaning is and whether if again tomorrow everything was to actually meet the risk, the biggest risk in your head, I guess, what you perceive to be the biggest risk for you. It might be one of your neighbors, for instance, might view that Pacific Ocean risk as the biggest thing that bothers them. Not the same for you, but I think that that is a question that is quite difficult for me personally. I'm sure other people as well might find it difficult to question. So it's a very good analogy of looking at it that I guess sort of helps me personally create a good framework around it. Um, I also want to touch on topics of life a little broadly just before I end. So you said that most people do things that they don't enjoy for a long part of their life before they actually reach a point where they might. In your case, given that,
If they don't assume that they do, right? You might never get to that point. I
yeah,
mean, I think that, I'm not a particularly religious person, but there are times in your life where I think you get what I call God shots, where
mhm,
there's a moment of clarity where you can see a pathway. This is what I need to do. But the problem is, if you're too busy, it comes and goes and you never notice it.
yeah,
And, and I think that that's part of the problem. It's not that no, you're never going to get that. For me, I was lucky. I happened to be aware at that moment, that first day I was a TA of, hey,
mhm,
this is what you were meant to do. But I'm convinced that we all get those moments during the course of a life. We push them away because they make us uncomfortable. Push them away because you're drinking coffee, you're doing things. And I think that my advice to people is be open to that God shot when it arrives, because it might be the difference between finding that what you want to do with the rest of your life
mhm,
and not ever finding that path. Because not only do many people end up doing things they don't want to do or don't enjoy doing for the bulk of their lives, they never find it.
right.
And I think that's something I don't wish on anyone, but I can see how it can happen
You think people miss it sometimes, that gut shot perhaps?
all the time, right? And the more stuff we fill our minds with, the more we're going to miss it, right?
Right.
In fact, you could argue that technology has made it even easier for us to miss those God shots, because 30 years ago, you were at the bank standing in a line. There's nothing for you to do. Today, you're standing in line at an airport waiting for a flight. Look around you. Look at what everybody else at that gate is doing, right? They're checking their phones, they're listening to. I mean, we are finding ways to fill every moment of every day with stuff that we claim is important stuff. That email we can't miss, that message from a friend, that music we have to listen to.
Mhm.
But is it really making that much of a difference to your life long term? I mean, I think that's a question we need to ask is, are we spending way too much on things that really don't make a difference, but convincing ourselves that they do?
Convincing, borderline, sometimes fooling ourselves, you could say
Yeah.
as well. Do you read a lot of
Yeah.
philosophy?
No,
No?
I don't read much. Huh?
Mhm. I've
Yeah,
heard that.
it's a, you know, again, you can read books, and maybe there will be a book that triggered that moment of reflection. So I'm not saying reading, I mean, I think it does matter. But if you spend all your time reading, then again, you're not giving yourself a chance to map your own philosophy, right? Because it's not about finding somebody else's philosophy and forcing it on yourself. It's finding a philosophy that works for you, and that takes looking inward rather than outward.
I think that is a challenge because sometimes it can be quite a lonely process as well. Coming up with these ideas that people might not agree with. It can require a lot of you internally, both emotionally, psychologically, and that's difficult, especially at a young age.
Yeah. It goes back to what you asked me about mentors. Part of the reason I'm leery when people email me and say, "Can you be my mentor?" is they want to kind of get this channeling that of I'll give you my philosophy, it's worked for me, so it should work for you. And it doesn't work that way. I think it's something that you got to discover for yourself and trust yourself on your choices.
It's not one size fits all.
No.
You've said that incremental growth is something that has sort of been an indicator of success for you. You've said that you get, again, this is a few years ago since when I heard this, you get average 300. I presume it's a lot more emails a day. And answering those emails, which oftentimes is just, oh yeah, you can find this material here, or this is the link to what you're asking for, is something that you've found to be, as you said, as you put it, as I recall, the highest return on investment.
Mhm.
Uh,
Absolutely, right? Small things you do for other people can have huge returns, you know. And the reason this goes with the incremental component is we all want to make change, right? Especially when you're young, to think about changing the world. And to me, the way you change the world is one little step at a time rather than trying to take the gigantic step or looking for that way to make a gigantic step. You spend the rest of your life looking for that gigantic step and you're never able to make it, you get frustrated. So rather than look for that huge change you're going to make overnight, well, make small changes and let them add up over time because they do add up over time.
Yeah, I think we certainly overestimate how much of an impact we can have. Why not start small, have more reachable, ambitious, or less ambitious goals, but more realistic goals? And I think that is a definition of success that I've personally tried to imbibe, and I think you've characterized it extremely well. Just to end, um, for students, because a lot of students will be watching this, I presume, and there's always a question of what is the right path, right? We've just discussed, for instance, how if I came to you asking for mentorship, it kind of distorts the idea of me having my own decision or my own conclusion of what a right path is. But what advice would you give to students in general? Not necessarily about what the right path is or what they should do, but about how they can get there.
I think that there is no right path because you have to say, what does right even mean here? I think that you need a path where you essentially have no regrets. So whatever choice you made, right? It's done. So whatever path you pick, don't look backwards at things you've done and beat yourself about. Look forward, right? You know, so don't look back and say, I wish I'd gone to this school instead of this school. I wish I'd taken this degree instead of this degree. I wish I'd bought this stock instead of this one. Because not only is it a complete waste of time, you cannot rewrite history. There is no time machine. It can actually distort the way you think about decisions you make in the future, right? So I think that rather than think, am I on the right path, accept the fact that you've taken a path, you're where you are. Ask yourself, what is the next step I can take on this path? That I think is a much healthier discussion than constantly asking yourself, is this the right path? Is this the right path? Because there's no real way of knowing whether the path is right.
Mhm. It's a very beautiful way of putting it because, again, you mentioned, I guess, 30 minutes ago that, for instance, when you see your, I guess, your granddaughter crawl or you see things around you, it can remind you of investing. And I think the same applies to investing. You can't change your investment decisions. You can't change the stock price, I guess, the shift in stock price that happened. What you can do is you can take that on, you can write, you can reflect what went wrong, what can go better, and you can either win next time or you learn, right? You win or learn. There's no losing with that mentality. And
Right.
that is a theme we've had come across with numerous guests on the show, and I'm glad to see that persist here as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm extremely grateful. This has been a very nice discussion, and I feel like a lot of my thoughts have been challenge is the wrong word, but I've started rethinking already, like how I thought about a lot of the concepts that I was not rigid in, but I think I had a strong belief in. So thank you for doing that, and I hope that you enjoyed as well.
Thank
So
you. I did. Yeah.
thank
Thank
you
you for
so much.
having me.
Thank you.